year in the NHL, we start to see a bunch of players realizing their full potential, and 2025 will be no different. But today we're going to go through every single NHL team, including your favorite team, to see who I think is the most likely player to break out in a major way. Going from Anaheim all the way down to the Winnipeg Jets, who do I see as the most likely players in the league to break out next year? And who do I see as the breakout player from your favorite team? Well, make sure you watch till the end as we go through every single player here today, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this as we crank them out during the offseason. Now, as you guys know, a couple years ago, I was pretty predictable with these breakout videos, mostly because I would just predict a team's best prospect or a guy that was just drafted to come to the NHL and do well. Well, over the last couple years, I've tried to challenge myself, and especially for this year's video, to try to challenge myself to predict other players that I could see breaking out and realizing their potential. They could be young, they could be old, any situation for any player counts for today's video. Now, how today's video is going to work is that, of course, we're going to mention every single team here in my breakout pick, but we're going to go through worst to best draft order. So we're going to start today here with the breakout player from Florida and end with the San Jose Sharks. So naturally, we start out with the Stanley Cup champion and my most likely player to break out for them next year. There are a couple of pretty interesting options, but to me, the most fascinating might be Adam Boqvist. Somebody who the Florida Panthers actually brought on this year as a free agent signing. He was bought out by Columbus, but to me, I still think has some value to bring. And I think it's a very good sign that it's a team like Florida bringing him on. Florida's been known to be a reclamation project for different D, especially recently like Oliver Ekman-Larsson and most notably Gustav Forsling. And in Boqvist's case, I still think there's potential there as a former 8th overall pick. I don't think he's going to realize that amount, but I think Florida needed to add an offensive D, especially with Brandon Montour gone now to Seattle and setting a major contract there. And they need to add somebody who can move the puck, and that's Boqvist's bread and butter. There are some major holes here in terms of defensive responsibility and decision making around his own nets, but those are things that I think Florida could really teach him to be a lot more responsible in. And on top of the good offensive habits, to me, I think Boqvist could play his best years here in Florida. And I would not be surprised if Boqvist puts up a 30-40 point season offensively in a little bit of a sheltered role still, but in Florida doing very well there. Now we move on to the Stanley Cup runner-up here in the Edmonton Oilers. And next for my breakout pick, I have Dylan Holloway, somebody that impressed me so much in this last playoff run for Edmonton. He was somebody that rose throughout the lineup, but just looked better and better, using his speed, using the physical traits in such a great way. He's somebody that, as a former top 20 pick by Edmonton, I thought always had potential as a good middle six piece, but I think we're going to start to see him really realize that, especially on the scoreboard this next year. You can check it out, just 9 points in 38 games in the regular season, but a little bit of an upgrade there, 5 goals, 2 assists, 7 points in 25 games, but honestly, I thought he could have gotten more points throughout that playoff run, but the energy, the intensity he was playing with, that was exactly what I wanted to see out of Holloway, really asserting himself, and I think the points will start to come this next year for him. Now we move on to the New York Rangers, and they're a team that has a wealth of breakout options pretty much every single season, but one that I thought was pretty underrated here is actually Zach Jones, a former 3rd round pick by the Rangers in 2019. It was a little bit surprising, but the Rangers actually didn't sign another LD. There is still time for that to happen, but as of right now, it goes Ryan Lindgren if they sign him, Keandre Miller, and Zach Jones as the bottom pair. But we started to see Zach Jones get a little bit more responsibility over the last couple of years, and this last season, he played 31 games, getting 2 goals, 7 assists, 9 points, and I thought it looked pretty good offensively, which is what Zach Jones does best. Now, I'm not here to say that Zach Jones is going to light the world on fire, but I could absolutely see him playing bottom pair minutes next year, getting some power play opportunity, and maybe getting around 25 points or so in a full season, but actually playing a full NHL season this time, and the Rangers utilizing him correctly. I think there's space for him on that roster, and I think this next year he'll really compete for it. Now we go into the Dallas Stars, my favorite team here, and there are so many options you could go for. You could go for Maverick Bourque, you could go for a Thomas Harley if you still feel like he hasn't broken out completely yet, but really the most logical option is Logan Stankoven, who is going to be fighting hard for that Calder Trophy this next year. To me, he's somebody that just showed so much, and has shown so much since being drafted where he was in the WHL, dominating there, then dominating in the AHL, and looking right at home at the NHL level, not just in the regular season, but having a good role in the playoffs too, and bringing the energy, bringing the intensity with the puck. Stankoven is just a beaut, and honestly, one of the more underrated Calder Trophy bets for next year. He could absolutely be in the thick of it. Next up now, we go on the Vancouver Canucks, and this is what I mean when I'm not just going to pick the younger player on every single team here, because my pick is actually Jake DeBrusk. Now, you could say that he's already broken out, but I feel like Jake DeBrusk hasn't yet fully broken out into a full-time, productive, top-of-the-line NHL player, which I still think he has the talent to do. I think he's been riddled with inconsistencies and trade requests and all this outside stuff. But I think now with Vancouver signing him to that huge extension, he is in the perfect place and the perfect position to be the player he needs to be and can be. I think he can be a top player, work off of a top centerman like Elias Pettersson. I think this next year, this first year in Vancouver, will be massive for him. And hopefully he can finally start putting the production he put in 2023 in a full-time season. 82 games, put around 60 plus points, and to me, that's exactly what Jake DeBrusk can and should be doing this next year. I don't think it's a make or break because obviously Vancouver signed him to this massive contract, but I do think making a good first impression in Vancouver is important to DeBrusk, and I think he will. Now we move on to the Carolina Hurricanes, who have a wealth of younger players you could choose from here, honestly. I think you could see Bradley Nadeau potentially in the AHL, maybe a Scott Morrow as well, gets a lot of NHL games, but to me the most likely younger prospect to make an impact in the NHL level for Carolina and to also be at a high level is actually Jackson Blake, who they signed from North Dakota this last year. He only played one game for them, wasn't crazy or anything, but I think Jackson Blake, in terms of maturity already, in terms of working in the lineup, has the best chance out of anybody, especially in that right side. Right now, it's like Eric Robinson for that fourth line right wing spot. I could absolutely see Jackson Blake being better than that, putting himself in a position in the bottom six and maybe even getting more time, especially Marty Necas where he be traded. I think that immediately puts up a spot for Jackson Blake to really cook. But I like him quite a bit. Really, since drafted, he has exploded his offensive game. And with North Dakota, you can see the production. 60 points in 40 games this last year. So good on the man advantage. So good when he has that little bit of open space. I think Jackson Blake, there will be some growing pains, but he's going to be a really solid middle six piece for the Canes here coming up and could immediately be that in his rookie year. Next up, we go on to the Winnipeg Jets, and I hope desperately to the Lord above that this is actually going to come true. Can Cole Perfetti break out with the Winnipeg Jets already? I'm begging. He's somebody I think has been destined to break out for a while now and played more games this last year, which I think was good for him. Got 38 points, just under that 40-point plateau. But to me, I think he absolutely deserves more responsibility. He was put in the doghouse for various reasons this last year. And sure, was this last season great for him? It wasn't. But I do think there's a lot to build off with Perfetti and the IQ and the decision-making. He has more to give. He can still be a top six player in this league, in my opinion, and Winnipeg just has not been able to find the right fit. This next year, though, I'm hoping that ends up being negated and he can finally break out into the player that I know he can be. But this is the year now. He's going to be turning 23 this next January. He needs to start showing up. Next up, we go on to the Boston Bruins, and they're a team that I went over a few players. You could go for Mason Lowride, though I would consider him kind of already broken out into that Boston defense. To me, most likely the big breakout piece could end up being John Beecher, somebody that as a centerman could end up rising in the lineup throughout the season, which is something that he almost ended up doing in the playoffs too. He was somebody I was really impressed with in that series versus Toronto, even though the points don't just spark at you. 2 points in 12 games isn't incredible. He's someone that you can tell with the intensity, with the work ethic he has, just makes a lot of the right decisions too, and that just provides a lot of positive output for his team when he's on the ice. I mean, he's somebody that I could absolutely see him in a great bottom six role, but also surpassing that at different points if there were to be injuries. At 23 years old, he's been developing well into that grinding physical centerman, and I think the sky is still a limit for him, honestly. Next up, we go on to the Colorado Avalanche. They could also be a team with a lot of the opportunity they have for the forward lineup, could see some breakouts. To me, the most likely one, though, is actually Nikolai Kovalenko, who was some of the Avs ended up signing, who was a former 6th round pick by them all the way back in 2018, finally came over to North America, and I think he's somebody that could be a really interesting piece of this Avs team. I mean, we talked about the depth issues that could be there, but he's a little bit of a missing piece. If he's somebody that ends up having a great first season in the NHL, then maybe that's something that could end up changing the course of this Avs season, honestly. But he's someone that you could see has been a great player in the KHL for a while now, and someone that could get as best as second line minutes immediately. And with that Avs roster, there are some good players to work off there. Now we go to the Toronto Maple Leafs here, and this one was a pretty easy one for me. And going out of the Toronto Maple Leafs, we go to Joseph Woll, who I think is really going to start solidifying himself as Toronto's full-time starter, barring any injuries. This is the time for him to do it. You can see over the past few seasons, whenever he's played in the NHL, he's always put up some pretty great results. In this last year, a 907 save percentage in 25 games, the most games he'd played up to this point, and the playoffs was pretty marvelous when he played. But this year, I'm hoping for full health. I'm hoping for a full starter season. We're talking at least 40 games here. I think Joseph Woll is capable of it, and with how he's played in the shorter sample size in the NHL level with Toronto, there is potential there. I think Woll is the future in the net for Toronto, and I think this next year we'll really start to see that even more. Next up, we go on to Nashville, and they're a team that is kind of a weird one to predict breakouts because they brought in a ton of big-time players in Stamkos and Marchessault and Shea. But to me, the player that's most likely to benefit from all of that is actually Tommy Novak, who recently signed that 3-year, $3.5 million extension with Nashville. And he's kind of in a weird range as a 27-year-old. He broke out of seemingly nowhere, being an ECHL player in 2021 at points, to being a guy who scored 43 points in 51 NHL games in 2023. Last year was a kind of inconsistent year for him. He had some moments where he showed incredible stuff like he always does, but then he kind of faded into invisibility. But now you can have the potential of wingers like Philip Forsberg or Steven Stamkos or Jonathan Marchessault full-time, and I think that really boosts what Novak can do. Nashville was definitely top-heavy going for Forsberg, O'Reilly, and Nyquist last year, but they didn't really leave much for Novak to work with. Now he has a lot more to work with this year, and as a center, with the passing ability he has, with the creativity he has, him and Steven Stamkos could be a lot of fun. Next up, we go into a pretty easy one, though, in the LA Kings, and this one has to be Brandt Clarke. You could also have maybe an Alex Lafayette in this perhaps, but I think Brandt Clarke fits the bill the best out of anyone. He's somebody that has just been scratching to get to the NHL level and is just right there on the cusp over these last couple of years, but hasn't gotten that full-time opportunity. Well, now I think it's there. I think he at least get middle pairing minutes. That's the goal. That's the hope. But I think offensively, if you put him in a middle pair, top power play time, you could shelter him pretty well, and I think he'll do well in that position. I think he just needs to have more faith, more confidence in him, and you'll start to see more results. I mean, even when there wasn't much confidence in him, he got 6 points in 16 games last year. Not too shabby, but I think this year is the year we finally see him break out and become an established NHL player. Next up, we go into the Tampa Bay Lightning, and they're a hard team to predict breakouts for because they kind of pick and choose who they'll actually have in the NHL roster at times in weird ways. You could have an NHLer like Jack Finley or maybe even a Connor Geekie coming up to the NHL and I think doing pretty well, but I just don't know if those guys will get the opportunities. Most likely, I think a player like Michael Eyssimont gets a bigger role this next year and does pretty well with it. I've always liked Eyssimont. He's somebody as a smaller but speedier forward can create a lot of havoc, and he was able to do pretty well this last year at Tampa. You could say that this was his breakout year, getting 25 points in 81 games, but I still think there's more in Eysimont's game to give. I could see maybe 30, 40 points this next year with Tampa, and hopefully even stronger depth than he was before. Next up, going on to the Vegas Golden Knights, they have a ton of options here. You could go for Brendan Brisson, Alexander Holtz, Victor Olofsson, perhaps. But to me, the most likely guy to benefit from all of the departures in Vegas is Pavel Dorofeyev, who I think instantly becomes Vegas' second left wing behind Ivan Barbashev, and to me, I think deserves the recognition. He got 24 points, 13 goals in 47 games this last year, and that was with some injury issues, some lopsided ice time, but now with the opportunity there, I think Dorofeyev can be more than the sum of his parts, be better than he was before. He's, of course, already an established player there, so he's already accustomed there to Bruce Cassidy's system. I think Dorofeyev is in for a solid year this next season and will continue to be a great pick at 79th overall. Now we go to the New York Islanders and we go back and forth between teams that have a lot of breakout options and not a lot, and a team that doesn't have a ton of options is the New York Islanders. The best one in my opinion is maybe Simone Holmstrom, and you could even make the case that he's already kind of broken out into what he is this last year, being somebody that could be such a good Swiss Army knife. 15 goals, 25 points in 75 games. He's someone that I think we could see a little bit more, especially 5-on-5, maybe 30, 35 points. It's not a huge breakout, but I'm trying the best with what I got, y'all. Now we go to the Washington Capitals, who have a lot of breakout options of their own, but to me, the most interesting one might actually be Henrik Lapierre. I kind of consider Connor McMichael broken out quite a bit already, so I think the next best option is Henrik Lapierre, who I think could easily be Washington's third line center, maybe even more if he transitions onto wing throughout the season, but I like Lapierre quite a bit with how he has dealt with so many injuries over the past few years, concussion-wise. He has bounced back in a lot of key areas, and you could see this last year, 22 points in 51 games, and also got a role as well in the playoffs there too, getting a goal there and an assist as well. He to me is somebody that has just gone through so much that I just want to see him break out. I want to see him be a key player for this Caps team, And I think he will be. Now we kind of go to the halfway point here, and now the non-playoff teams and their breakout players for next year. We go into the St. Louis Blues, and next up I got Scott Perunovich, who is somebody that I think has dealt with just, like Lapierre, a lot of injury issues that have held him back, but he had been an incredible college player for Minnesota Duluth, putting up some great seasons, dependable hockey there as a D, but he's someone that came over to North America and already was starting to get some bad luck here and there. But this last season, he played 54 games, had his biggest NHL season in terms of workload and responsibility, and I thought did pretty well as an offensive D. 17 assists, 17 points, but I still don't think that's close to what Perunovich can bring. I think we can see a 40-point defenseman out of him, and I think this next year, health and consistency will be the two things to add. Now we go from defensive prospect to defensive prospect, and we go into the Detroit Red Wings here, and this has got to be the year that Simone Edvinsson finally breaks out. I think it absolutely could be. I think there's a slot there for him to really compete in Detroit's defense, and I think this is the year for him to really break out, really get going, really log some big minutes, and get responsibility within Detroit's system. You can see these last couple of years, he's been slowly working his way up in the AHL, getting more and more minutes, more responsibility in Grand Rapids. But man, I think the talent is there defensively, the physical play, the skating. There's so much to love Edvinsson. It's just about putting it all together at the NHL level, keeping up with the pace, keeping up with the decision making, and that to me has been a test in Edvinsson's case. But I think now he's up for it, and turning 22 this next year in February, it's not a make or break, but you really want to see him finally make those moves. Now we go on to the Pittsburgh Penguins, another team in the East that just barely missed the playoffs. Next, though, for my breakout player, I actually am going to go for Michael Bunting here, who was a part of the Jake Gensel trade and actually looked like a pretty good addition for the Penguins when he was traded there. In the 21 games he played, he got 6 goals, 13 assists, 19 points, and looked right at home offensively. I don't know if he's going to be at that type of points per game production next year, but I could easily see him being around 50, 60 points or so in the right situation there. It just felt like Pittsburgh was the best spot for him, and immediately he seemed to gel. I think that will continue on to 2025. Now we go on to the Minnesota Wild here, and there's a couple of options that I do like. Of course, Marco Rossi will always be my boy and always be in here as well, but I think the most likely one will actually be Marat Kuzadinov, somebody that we did see sign from Russia and got his first taste in the NHL this last year, playing 16 games, getting 1 goal, 3 assists, 4 points. There was some growing pains there as he was adapting to the speed of the NHL and adapting to the positioning needed there in the shorter ice surfaces, but I love Kuzadinov. You guys know I've loved Kuzadinov for a long time, heading back to his draft year with the intensity, with the 200-foot IQ. There's a lot to like there as a center going forward. Sure, is he smaller? Absolutely, but a lot of the things he does on the ice are positive, and it flows the game in the right direction. I think this next year, we're going to start to really see that on the ice. Next up, we go on to Philly, and one of the easiest breakout picks to make in Matvei Michkov. We all know just how good Michkov can be, but this year, with him signed way earlier than expected, we will start to finally see that awesome franchise talent. I think immediately he'll be a Calder contender, and I think Philly has a good group of forwards around him to play pretty well off of. You can see what he's been able to do in the KHL last couple of seasons, and this last year, 41 points, 19 goals to Sochi. He was on still a pretty weird team, pretty weird offensive squad. With Philadelphia, though, with the players that he has, with the skill levels there and guys like Konechny, you could have a really good first season, and even if he has an okay first season, he'll still be a great player in the future. But I think Michkov has the talents, the game-breaking ability to be an immediate impact forward on day one. Now we go to the Buffalo Sabres here, and I'm actually going to go on the goaltending side here in Devon Levi. And here's the thing, a big reason why I didn't see Buffalo making the playoffs last year was because I thought they were going to over-rely on Devon Levi and ride him into the ground. And that didn't quite happen because they sent him into the AHL, but he didn't have the season that many people were expecting, the Calder season that people were expecting. He played 23 games, getting an .899 save percentage. But I think this next year, with the seasoning he got in the AHL level, being a full-time goalie there in Rochester, I think we're going to see Levi get that confidence back and be an NHL goalie now. It took a little bit longer than some people expected, but I still think Levi is going to be just fine. Now going on to the New Jersey Devils, and this is another team that I'm going to be a little bit different with because you could absolutely go Luke Hughes, Simone Nemeth, and those two guys I think are great quality options. But I wanted to go for somebody a little bit more under the radar and somebody that was actually a part of the Alexander Holtz trade in Paul Cotter. I am a really big fan of Paul Cotter. I love his game. I love the intensity he brings. He's somebody that has really just grinded his way up to a good role in the NHL. And this last year in 76 games, he got 7 goals, 18 assists for 25 points. And I think Vegas was an excellent depth piece. I think he will be that once again for New Jersey. But I would not be surprised if he's somebody that works his way up the lineup with the intensity he has and is just a good complementary forward up and down the lineup. Wherever you want him, I think Cotter could kind of plug and play, and I think that versatility is something New Jersey is really going to like. Now we go on to the Calgary Flames here, and somebody that I think, just like Matvei Michkov, could be in the Calder conversation in Dustin Wolf. Now with Jacob Markstrom gone completely, the starter role in Calgary is completely open, and I think Dustin Wolf, this is finally the year we see him capitalize on that completely. He was able to get a pretty good chunk of opportunity in the NHL in this second half. Wasn't incredible, but it was really his first stint in the NHL level. You can't really blame him for how young he is still. But I think this next year, with the opportunity he has with the season he was able to get in the AHL, we're going to see him break out with the Flames and be that starter of the future. Not immediately, I don't think he's going to be the best goaltender in the world, but he'll be pretty solid. And among rookies, maybe the best goaltender of the bunch, especially with Devon Levi there. Those two are going to be brilliant together. Now we continue on, and we're going to go on to the Seattle Kraken next up. And I could also see a Riker Evans potentially being in the slot, but most likely it'll end up being Shane Wright. The big thing that can hold him back is just a lack of opportunity. I still don't understand why they signed Chandler Stevenson to that deal. I just don't really know in general what Seattle is trying to accomplish. They kind of seem right in the middle of the NHL, which is not where you want to be. But I do think Shane Wright will have a great rookie season for Seattle. Whenever he has played, I thought he did pretty well. And this last year, when he got a little opportunity, he played really solidly. In 8 games, he got 4 goals, 1 assist, 5 points, was great in the AHL playoffs. I think we are finally starting to see the offensive potential with Shane Wright. And I think this next year, he won't explode the world. I don't think he's going to win the Calder Trophy, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's around 30, 40 points, and it's just a really solid rookie season altogether. Now we're going to go from Shane to Shane, and next up with the Ottawa Senators, my pick is actually going to be Shane Pinto here. And to me, I think it's for a multitude of reasons. He's somebody that about had a great season, rookie year back in 2023. And this last year, we didn't really see him play the full season because of course, the gambling issue there. And he only played 41 games, but he still got 27 points and looked pretty good when he did play in that second half. To me, with this full season coming up, we're going to see another big growth in Shane Pinto's game. I could absolutely see maybe 50 points, 55 points-ish. He's somebody that I think is going to be a really underrated center coming up here as the second line center for them, and I think will fit pretty effortlessly into that role. Next up, we go on to the Utah Hockey Club, and they got a bunch of different options as well. With just how young that roster is, you can go in any direction. But to me, the most likely breakout pick is Dylan Guenther, somebody that just was ridiculous for Arizona in a lot of key areas in games in the second half of last year. He ended up finishing with 18 goals, 35 points in 45 games. And considering the opportunity that Utah will give him next year, considering the top 6 position is practically a lock for him as it should be, there is so much to work off there. And if he's on the same line as maybe Keller, Cooley as well, those 3 could be a ton of fun. I just think Guenther is in a prime position to really show the goal scoring, really show that offense on a full scale season, and hopefully he's able to prove himself for Utah coming up. Next up, we go on to the Montreal Canadiens, another youthful team that has a ton of options to work with, but I gotta go with Lane Hutson here. To me, it is the easy choice. I think there will be some growing pains, absolutely. Defensively, I don't think he's going to be unbelievable on day one, nor will I ever think he will be. He'll always be, I think, okay at best there, physically and around his own net. But man, can that guy transport the puck? Can he transition up the ice with just absolute bliss? He's somebody that just brings so much confidence, such a great puck moving ability, and a great head on his shoulders. He's somebody that offensively can bring so much for Montreal, and I think will immediately be one of the better scoring rookie defensemen. And I think especially if they shelter him in the right position, Hutson could be pretty excellent from day one. I mean, he was in the NHL games he played, already bringing that Lane Hutson brand to the NHL. Next up, we go into the Columbus Blue Jackets, another team that you could have a lot of options for, but I wanted to go a little bit off the board here to a goaltender that I don't think a lot of people know too much about, but I think is really going to start to show himself well this next year in Daniil Tarasov. Somebody who I think will pretty much immediately become the starter there in Columbus. I don't have much help in Elvis Merzlikins being that guy anymore, but Tarasov has been slowly but surely working his way into an NHL role. You can see this last year in 24 games. He got a 908 save percentage, looked pretty good, and in terms of goals saved above expected, was above average as well. To me, I think Tarasov is due for a good breakout season. His age is right there, turning 26 in March. With the talent, with the potential he's been building on, I think now is the time we start to see him collect himself completely and be a decent starter for Columbus. Next up now, we go on to the Anaheim Ducks, and I gotta go Cutter Gauthier. You could go for a Zellweger or potentially a Dostal as well in this spot, but Cutter Gauthier, I think, is the most likely to make an immediate impact and also be a Calder Trophy frontrunner. He absolutely deserves to be in that position with how he's played at the World Juniors and the NCAA, with how much he's dominated with Boston College against every team he plays for. He's just so good at using his body, at using his talent, as using everything in the ice. He plays in all three zones so well, so hard, and the quick decisions he makes, the ability to rush up the ice effortlessly. There's just a lot to like here with Anaheim and Gauthier and the fit there, and I think immediately they'll be pretty good at the NHL level. Now we go into Chicago, and this is a team that you could go for a ton of younger players, but I'm actually going to go for a little bit of an older one who I think will be great alongside Connor Bedard this next year in Tyler Bertuzzi. Now, I think I end up picking him as well as my breakout pick for Toronto last year, and that didn't quite work out. But I think in a new situation in Chicago, full-time, with the trust there, especially on that first line, which I think he's going to work out greatly with Bedard, I could easily see him having his best season ever. You can see his best season was probably back in 2022, where he got 62 points, 30 goals in 68 games. But I think in Chicago, with Bedard really pushing himself and playing his best hockey, I think we're just going to see Bertuzzi be the perfect complementary player. Banging it, crashing in front of the net, getting those loose pucks, stuffing them home, doing exactly what Tyler Bertuzzi should, getting under the skin of every team he plays against, and being really the perfect line mate for Bedard at this stage. I think Bertuzzi is really going to take advantage of it, and in Chicago is going to put up some pretty great results. But now we go on to the last team to talk about here in the San Jose Sharks, and they could go for, a couple options. I think Henry Front and Ty Emerson are underrated on that defense. Two guys who are going to be playing some pretty big minutes next year. You could also go for Will Smith as well, but let's be honest, the most likely breakout candidate is, of course, Macklin Celebrini, who I think will be making a pretty immediate impact in the NHL. I don't think he's going to be lighting the world on fire like Bedard did, or he's going to be at this 100-point pace, but I think Celebrini is going to be exactly what San Jose needed in terms of the all-around game. I think he's going to be extremely responsible, but bringing that offensive potential, that shot, that power play ability immediately. There might be some one-dimensionality in his offense, and I think there will be some growing pains there, but Celebrini is exactly what San Jose needed for the future, and a franchise future captain in San Jose will start his year one campaign in 2025. But those are my breakout picks for this next year, and I want to know down below what you guys agree, what you guys disagree, and let me know for your favorite team, who you see being the breakout player for your team in 2025. Let me know all your thoughts down below. Of course, make sure you share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online, and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell if you guys enjoyed. Make sure you click on this card as well for all my rankings content in one playlist, and I will see you guys in the next one. Have a great hockey day, and goodbye.